My therapist said I was clearly lying about my childhood trauma. I have recordings of everything that happened. Dr. Vivian Cross leaned back in her leather chair and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before in our 6 months of sessions together. Her office was on the 3rd floor of a medical building downtown, decorated with abstract paintings and degrees from prestigious universities hanging on the walls behind her desk. I just finished telling her about a specific incident from Meadowbrook Group Home when I was 13 years old, describing how Kenneth Brenner locked me in the basement storage room for 18 hours after I reported him for hitting another kid. Dr. Cross set down her notepad and folded her hands in her lap. Caleb, I need to be honest with you. What you're describing sounds like a textbook case of false memory syndrome. These detailed narratives you've been constructing over the past few months, they're not consistent with how actual traumatic memories work. Her voice was calm and clinical, the same tone she'd used when we discussed my anxiety and insomnia. But now there was something else underneath it, something almost dismissive. I felt my stomach drop because I'd been building up the courage for weeks to share these specific details with her. What do you mean false memories? I was there. I lived through it. Dr. Cross pulled out a different notebook and started writing quickly. Trauma survivors often conflate different events, create composite memories, or unconsciously embellish details to make sense of generalized feelings of distress. The human brain is remarkably unreliable when it comes to childhood memories, especially ones tied to emotional pain. She looked up at me and her expression was professional but firm. I think what we're dealing with here is a pattern of confabulation. You've convinced yourself these events happened exactly as you're describing them, but the likelihood of you remembering such specific details from over 15 years ago is extremely low. I watched her write something else in her notes, and I noticed she'd moved from her regular session notebook to what looked like a clinical assessment form. Are you saying you don't believe me? Dr. Cross set down her pen and gave me what I assumed was supposed to be a compassionate look. I'm saying that your mind is trying to create a coherent narrative to explain your current symptoms, and in doing so, it's manufacturing memories that feel real but may not reflect actual events. This is actually quite common in patients with your symptom profile. She gestured to her computer screen where she'd been tracking my progress notes. Look at how your stories have evolved over our sessions. Each week, you remember more details, more specific dialogue, more elaborate scenarios. That's not how genuine traumatic memory works. Real trauma memories are typically fragmented, incomplete, lacking in detail. I felt anger rising in my chest, mixing with the familiar anxiety that had brought me to therapy in the first place. So you think I'm making all of this up? Dr. Cross shook her head quickly. Not consciously. I think you believe what you're telling me, but belief doesn't equal truth, especially when it comes to memory. I reached into my backpack and pulled out a small external hard drive that I'd been carrying with me for the past 3 weeks, waiting for the right moment to share it with Dr. Cross. What if I told you I have proof? Audio recordings from Meadowbrook, dozens of hours of them, documenting everything I've told you about. I set the hard drive on the small table between us and watched her face carefully. Her expression shifted immediately from professional concern to something I couldn't quite read. Her eyes fixed on the hard drive and her jaw tightened slightly. Recordings? What do you mean recordings? I explained that when I was 12 years old, a social worker named Monica Reeves had given me a small digital voice recorder, one of those devices that looked like a regular pen but had a microphone built in. Monica had been concerned about reports she'd heard from multiple kids at Meadowbrook but couldn't get anyone to go on record because we were all terrified of Kenneth Brenner and the director, Gary Westfield. She told me to keep the recorder hidden and turn it on whenever I felt unsafe. Dr. Cross leaned forward in her chair and I could see her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her water glass. Caleb, recording people without their consent is illegal in most circumstances. Even if these recordings exist, they wouldn't be admissible as evidence of anything. Her voice had changed completely, losing that therapeutic warmth and taking on a defensive edge. And frankly, the existence of recordings doesn't validate your interpretation of events. Audio can be misunderstood, taken out of context, or even manipulated. I picked up the hard drive and turned it over in my hands. I haven't manipulated anything. These are raw files, time-stamped, with metadata showing when and where they were recorded. I have Kenneth Brenner's voice clearly threatening me. I have Gary Westfield telling staff to ignore our complaints. I have evidence of everything I've been telling you. Dr. Cross stood up abruptly and walked to her desk, putting physical distance between us. I think we need to pause here. This is concerning behavior, Caleb. Bringing alleged recordings to therapy, insisting that your memories are accurate despite clinical evidence suggesting otherwise. She opened a drawer in her desk and pulled out a different form, something I'd never seen her use before. What she said next made my heart race. To see the full story, click the link below or go on my channel.